Hey folks, Quilly18 here, and welcome to another episode of Project SpaceCube, our tutorial for making basically a spaceship out of cubes. Well, not just cubes, actually, quite a few different shapes, which is why last time we had to go and add the support for these little knobbly connecting snap points, which do correctly work. If we click on the box, nothing happens, but if we click on the snap point, that happens over there. But as we can see, there is this weird sort of gap going on. And the reason for that is because previously the way we had the code working is we were using the normal vector of our collision that when we clicked on the spot, the normal vector gave us the direction, so we could sort of figure out what side of the box we were clicking on. We were offsetting things appropriately and also using that to orientate our object. But clearly it's not quite right anymore. So let's go and make that adjustment over there. It's quite easy to do. First of all, our spawn spot here used to be whatever we clicked on, whatever we hit, and then offset by this normal vector, which worked great when we had single unit cubes all the time, but that's not what we're ending up with. What we're going to do is we're going to remove this normal addition. We want to spawn our object such that it is at exact same position as the thing that we clicked on. Basically, the middle point, the snap point that we have, right? Its position is actually right in the middle of the box, which is perfect because the box is, well, halfway in here. So if we spawn right at the middle point of the box, we will be perfectly aligned, flush to the surface. That's exactly what we want. However, if I hit play right now, we won't quite get what we think. We are interpenetrating here. Why is that? Well, when we originally, let me drop my thruster into the scene here, and yeah, it's at 0, 0, and a Z of 1, and that looks fine. But that's when we were assuming that the correct offset for our images was going to be with the assumption of certain coordinates that are no longer true. So how are we going to fix that? Well, we've got, what we're going to do, it's very easy for us to rearrange it. We're going to use this snap point here as, oh, you can't quite see it, hold on, let me move this aside. Right, we're going to use this snap point to recalibrate how our models are set up, because this is a snap point with no rotation whatsoever. It assumes that the positive z-axis is facing away from the box without any rotation whatsoever, so it's a good base. So I'm going to take this thruster here, I'm going to move it into that snap point as a parent, and then on the thruster I'm going to set its position to be 0. So this would be the correct position for the thruster, like the thruster parent object, when it is attached to this snap point, for example. And clearly, our graphics are not quite in the right position. So all we're going to do is we're going to slide the graphics so they look just about right. Yeah, very little to no overlap over here. That's great. So then what I'm going to do with my thruster is I'm going to, I think I could apply here. Would that break the cube? I don't think so, but just in case, I'm going to then take the thruster out of the hierarchy over here. Okay, and then I'm going to hit apply to that. So what this will do is it will lock in the graphics in the correct position. So now if I go and delete this and hit play and click on the front face of the cube, ooh, that looks right. And then the top one, and then this one over here, good. Clearly our offsets are correct. However, there is still a bit of an issue because, and this is going to be a little hard to do at this zoom level. Let me zoom in with the camera here. I'm going to click on the side of the cube over here. Instead of the front of it, I'm going to click on the side of this cube. And then we get something a little bit weird. It's quite clear that our thruster has spawned at the right position because the sort of connecting point of the thruster, the root point of the thruster, is correctly in the middle of the snap point, but it's facing the wrong direction. The reason for that is because our spawn rotation, again, we were looking at that normal vector that was coming off of the surface that we clicked on. So once again, we don't need that. And in fact, really what our rotation is going to be is we're going to steal the rotation of the object that we clicked on, because each one of our cubes should be rotated to face the correct way around so that the positive z of the cube's local coordinates is facing away from the surface that the snap point is attached to. So if we use the cube's rotation, I don't think we have to use local rotation. No, I think that would actually be quite wrong. So this hitinfo.collider.transform, that's our snap point cube. So if we use its rotation as the rotation of the new object instead of the hit point, so now, again, let me zoom in. If I click on the front face here, that looks good. Now I'm going to click on the side of the cube here. Well, it shouldn't matter where on the cube I hit. There we go, and there. All I care about is that I clicked on the cube at all. We use the same rotation as the cube. That looks all right. Now, what we have to do at this point is we'll also have to make a bit of an adjustment to the triangle's position. So again, I'm going to take the triangle, I'm put it inside the base snap point over here, which will give us a, what am I looking? Okay, looking straight down. Yes, good. Good. Give us a good base position. I'm going to, oh, the scaling. That's what's going on. Hold on. Because I'm dropping the triangle inside of something that's scaled down, the scale is applying. I'm going to start by dropping it into the scene. Then I'm going to drop it into the snap point. And you'll actually see on a triangle, it's got a increased scale over here, which keeps it the same relative to the world. I'm going to set its position to 0, 0, 0 relative to its parent, which is the snap point. And then I will simply move the triangle so it is not poking into anything. That looks about right. So again, I'll just move it out of the hierarchy just in case. I will apply these changes, and then I will delete that. So then if I go back to my scripts and I drop the triangle into the prefab to spawn and hit play, then we should, there we go, correctly get that going on. Excellent. Hey, let's try one of the angly bits. Let's get a triangle back in the scene. Boop. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a snap point on the triangle side face. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to steal one of these snap points. I'm just going to duplicate this one with Control D, and I'm going to drop this inside the triangle. And I don't know, I'll just rename it to the normal snap point, not that it matters over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it so that it's, I don't know, I guess kind of in the middle-ish of this triangle's face. And then I'm going to rotate it. So this is the positive Z, right? The blue arrow, especially if we're on local mode. Right now, it happens to be the same. But in local mode, the blue arrow is positive Z. This is supposed to face away from the surface that we're on so that whatever we snap onto this will be orientated correctly. It looks like we're probably, yeah, I got to move in a little bit more so it's properly flush on the surface. So I'm going to hit the E hotkey, go into rotation mode over here, do that. And now that I've done that, I can see in the inspector that clearly negative 45 degrees is the sort of rotation we're looking at. So I'm just going to go and now type that in so that we're exact. And that's looking okay. And actually, based on the blue line of the little rotation widget, it looks like I can probably come out just, I guess the yellow line there can be flush. There we go, something like that. But again, if I'm in local mode, so if I go back to global mode, this is the global positive Z. But if I go into local mode with this cube is selected, you can see that the local positive Z is correctly facing away from the surface here. So I'm going to take this triangle, I'm going to apply the changes to the triangle prefab. Then I'm going to hit play. And then if I click on the top here, you can see I've got my little click point on the triangle. I'm going to click on that. Boom. And correctly, we do indeed have this thing spawning nice and flush. And then click on the front and then click there. Excellent. Lovely. Oh, that's beautiful. What a gorgeous little, kind of looks like a, I don't know, like a spiked hairdo kind of thing. I'm not sure what's going on there, but hey, we're adding cubes on the go. The funny little lines here I think have to do with shadow bias, which you can tune in the lighting thing, but we're not going to worry about it. In fact, I don't even know if that would show up in the scene over here because the rendering quality is a lot higher. Anywho, okay, that seems to be working swell. Interestingly enough, the biggest outstanding problem right now will likely be, if we go back into scripts and the prefab to spawn, if we put the cube in there, this may not work quite right. See? Doesn't work quite right. And why is that? Why is that? Well, first of all, apparently, for one, I never applied the changes to the prefab. I'm like, why is the color wrong? There we go. Now we got green knobs. Okay, that's good. But why are things interpenetrating like this? Well, it's because, unlike what we did with the thruster and the triangle, the cube's not inside of a parent. And you should always, your model, your visual model, always have it inside of a parent so that you can do things like offset stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new empty. And I guess this will be, I'll call this cube. And I'll drag this in. And then I'm going to call this part the cube graphics, like that. And then I guess I'm going to get rid of this old prefab completely and drag the new cube into the prefab list. All right, so now nothing has changed yet, but again, if we hit play, right, if I click this, we'll still get things to, oops. Right, scripts over here, I need to make sure to give it the reference to the new cube because it was pointing to the old prefab. Hit play again. Okay, Oh, our scene's not centered properly. Let me go and center the cube in the middle and recenter the cube graphics. And then, again, apply these changes. So now if I do this, we're going to go back to the old behavior. There we go, which is this, which is clearly not what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did to fix the thruster in the triangle. I'm going to grab a new cube, drop it into the scene. Then I'm going to go and drop that into the snap point. I'm going to center this cube onto that snap point. Then I'm going to take the cube graphics and I'm going to offset the graphics until the cube would spawn at the correct place, which to me should be a little bit closer like that. There we go. So then if I then take this cube out of that hierarchy, apply the changes to the prefab, and hit play, now what should happen, there we go. Now we have correctly offset cubes. Lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, very nice. Now, there is one funny thing going on here with the cube. When you look at the thruster, and when you look at the triangle, especially the triangle, because we actually did put a connection point on there, right? There's a connection point here, but remember that the root of these objects is on the back side here, right? This is where we connect to another snap point. Well, what the hell did I just do? There we go. Well, neither the triangle nor the thruster has a snap point on the back, which makes sense. You're never going to see this back side. But the cube, it does. For the cube, and this becomes especially obvious if on all these objects, let me go and center them all. Whoopsie daisy. Come on, expand. I'm going to center them all. Then I'm going to take the triangle and move it on one side. I'm going to take the thruster and move it on the other. It's quite obvious that on this 0 line, this is where you connect, which makes sense, right? This is the z equals 0 point. So, and everything is flush to there. That makes perfect sense. So this little knob here, this snap point on this cube, is completely redundant. Now, we probably need a cube. When we start our scene, we probably need a 6-sided cube in the scene with a snap point on each one of those 6 sides. But I'm going to differentiate and take this cube, duplicate it, and I'm going to call this copy root. This is the root object from which the spaceship founds itself. So we're going to drop it in the prefab. And this root, what's interesting about it, it actually, how come oh, derp, selected here. This root object actually doesn't actually matter at all what its graphics are set up to be. We could offset things, we could do all sorts of crazy things, but this is the thing from which we build the entirety of the ship. This is the thing that a scene is going to start with, and it's going to have all the knobs on all of the sides, all the snap points. But our actual cube bit, this is not what's going to be our root object. I'm going to go ahead and delete the snap point on the z equals 0 face over here, because that's going to be the point that it attaches to everything else. So I'm going to apply the changes to this prefab. I'm going to get rid of the triangle, the thruster, and the cube, and the root object. I'll just recenter it here. This root object looks very similar to the cube, but technically it's a different thing because it's got all the knobs. Hit play. Our script is still set to spawn cubes, not roots, and that will continue to work perfectly fine. Okay. That is pretty good. This also opens up the possibility. Let's take our cube object over here. And this one, I'll just offset it to the side here so we can see what's going on. This one I'm going to call rectangle. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to stretch it to be longer. But this is also one of the advantages to this structure, because I don't want to scale the base object, because that stretches everything oddly. What I want to do is stretch the graphics. In fact, I'm going to take these snap points here, I'm going to move them out of the graphic and move them onto the rectangle side, because that way when I stretch this cube graphic to make it, say, twice as long, and I guess offset that way, there we go, that looks quite nice. When I've done that, now my snap points don't get stretched oddly. I think the position of most of the snap points is okay. This one here clearly has to get moved over here, where it's going to be a Z of 2. There we go, because we snap there. I'm actually going to take all 4 of these, which ring around this way. I'm going to hit Control-D to duplicate them, and I'm going to give them a Z of 1.5. There we go. And actually, it looks like these here, yeah, because of the way I'd sort of eyeballed things before, I'm just going to set them to exactly a 0.5 Z. There we go. So now we have a new rectangle. The graphics stretched a little bit, but that's okay. We have a rectangle piece with a lot more connecting bits. And if I go and turn this into a prefab and delete it from the scene, and then on our scripts, let's have us spawn the rectangle object instead. Hit play. Boom, boom, boom. Excellent. So now you can tell between like the rectangle and that triangle form, you can see that we can build things. Oh, what am I doing clicking here? Derp, derp. It's here that I'm supposed to be clicking. We can build things basically of any arbitrary component. And our thruster, if I go and drop that in there, is an example of the fact that we don't need everything to have even more connection points. The thruster literally has no connection points because nothing can ever connect to it. Boom. All right. Well, that's kind of cool. So far, we haven't done anything special with our structure over here. The other thing that's worth noting is I just spawned this thruster over here. If I move it aside, you can see that the snap point is still there, which may or may not be desirable. What we could do, right, if we look, so, sorry, let me back up here and add things to here, right? I'm spawning a bunch of stuff on the root layer of the project. I'm not generally a fan of this. I think I talked about this in another video and it was a little bit of a sloppy thing, the way that I presented it, because our structure previously with how we were handling clicks would have been kind of awkward. But here, wouldn't it make great sense, right? If when I go and click on, say, this snap point, and I spawn a new object, wouldn't it make a lot of sense if the object that spawns actually is a child of the snap point? I think that's a fantastic idea. Therefore, after we spawn the object, well, I guess I could do it here now, right? You can add an extra parameter to instantiate. I don't think this was present in older versions of Unity, but I think I'm on Unity 5.4. I don't know when they added this. You can specify a parent here. If for some reason you're in your older version of Unity, and assuming I'm right that that wasn't a feature, then what we have to do is grab a copy of the instantiated game object, which will also require us to cast because instantiate returns just object as opposed to game object. So we got to cast it to game object. And then we can say game object.transform.set parent. And we're going to set the parent to be the hit info colliders transform, which is going to be the snap points transform. And that was going to be really awkward before because of various things about how we'd structured things. But now it's actually kind of nice because I can hit play, connect something over here, and notice this is where the objects spawn here. Right? And do this and do this. And I can collapse it all to root. This is my whole root object. I could take this whole thing and say, move it around the scene if I needed to. Right? And then I can still just snap things, and that's fine. Right? I'll move it here and then snap things here. Everything's looking great. And then keep moving things around. Everything is working pretty much the way we want it. And one of the cool things about this is we want this to be like a physics-enabled ship. Well, that means we're going to need a rigid body. And where does the rigid body go? Well, it will go on the root over here. I could actually, I don't know if this is going to crash things. There we go. Added a rigid body. And now, because we have gravity turned on, it falls right away. But that's kind of cool. So really, root here is kind of like the ship. Well, the ship root, or I don't know. I don't know what you want to call it. I guess ship root is pretty okay. And yeah, we wouldn't want to spawn with a rigid body. Or maybe you would, but you want to set it into kinematic mode. I guess we could do that. Let's see here. So we can assume we want a rigid body on a ship. Notice that this base object has no collider, no collision box, or anything like this. This rigid body will correctly calculate all the physics based on the totality of all the collision boxes within our object. Although I suppose that would also include the snap points, but they're set to triggers, which is good. Okay. So they won't be considered part of the ship's mass. So that's great. So I'm going to set it to is kinematic over here. A kinematic rigid body does not calculate if it gets hit by something, it doesn't start to move. Like it doesn't, take in inertia. It's not affected by gravity or anything like that. So I could build that up. But at any point, if I disable the kinematic aspect, then all the physics of the game would kick in, which is going to be helpful later on. So we got that. I love the fact that we've got this going on. Here's something else you could consider. It's not really important, but after you connect an object to a snap point, what you could do, instead of connecting this way, you could, I don't know, disable the snap point or do this or that. Like there's a few different things you could do to potentially save a little bit of processing power for your computer. I mean, I can't just disable, do the set enable on the snap point as a whole, because it also disables all the children, so that's not good. But I suppose we could disable, say, the mesh renderer. Clearly, the snap point won't be rendered when something spawned on top of it. And in fact, if we snapped something very narrow on this, imagine we had an antenna, a very skinny antenna. It's very easy to imagine that the antenna is so skinny that you could still see the snap point behind it or around it, which would be pretty miserable. So it might be a really good idea to do something like disable the renderer on the snap point while something is attached to it. So we could do that pretty easily. So our collider, our snap point is hidinfo.collider. And it's a game object, but at this point we could say get component, there we go, get component renderer. And what I could do is set the enable to be false, right? If we do this, and we might want to, is there any reason that it wouldn't have a renderer? I guess it's possible. Seems kind of weird, but I guess we could check. If renderer is not equal to null, then we just set it to false. So as long as there's a renderer, we set it to false. So then if I hit play and I click on this front thing, our snap point, if we look here, you can see the mesh renderer is turned off. In fact, and again, I don't know if this is particularly critical, but we could do the same thing for the collider. Notice that it's actually a mesh renderer and a box collider on these objects, but those are both derived from this parent. So we don't necessarily need to know what kind of renderer, although it'll always be a mesh renderer. The collider is quite a bit more interesting because it might not always be a box collider. It might in fact be a mesh collider, or it could be a sphere collider, could be different things like this. If we do this, that should also do that. So if I click here, so on our snap point, the box collider and the mesh collider are both disabled. I don't think there's actually that much overhead to leaving them on, but there might be something. And especially as your model gets more and more involved, you may want to do that. And then if you've got some sort of mechanic where you can delete an object, note the snap point now, sorry, not that one, this one here, right? Still has the mesh collider and the box collider turned off. If you have some sort of mechanic where a part of your ship can be removed, then what you would want to do, right? So some sort of void remove part game object geo, right? Do something like, so we're ultimately going to destroy ourselves. Whoops. But before we do that, make sure to, what is it? Game object dot destroy. Oh, I'm inside of a function. That's what's going on. I'm like, hold on, I'm sure this is right. There we go. Okay. Make sure to re-enable the snap point we are attached to. So what we do is something like our game objects transforms parent dot get component renderer. And this should work with things that are asleep or are set inactive, I think. We can set it to enable being true. And the same thing for our collider, assuming those things exist. Again, you may want to wrap it around or whatever, but have some sort of this. We're not calling remove part now, but you could do something of this nature to turn it back on once things get removed or destroyed or something of that nature, right? This is just an example. May not work right as is. Okay, just an example for argument's sake. But we're getting pretty okay here. I like that. So what's the next step? I guess the next step is to make like cool spaceship. Oh, you know what? The next step will probably be to make a little bit of a user interface so we can actually swap what object we are building. Because right now I have to go into the scripts over here and say, okay, now I want to add a thruster by dragging that in. Now I can add thrusters over here to make our spaceship go. So next thing will probably be to do a little bit of user interface. But then, speaking of user interface, what I would like to do for these thrusters is I would like to make it, because especially if you got thrusters to the side like this, I would like to be able to say, Okay, for these thrusters, when I hold down the up arrow, or perhaps W key on the keyboard, that's when I want you to go. And you over here, I want you to only trigger when I hit the left arrow, etc., etc., etc. So that sort of mechanic in there. Although the other thing that's going to be important is we're going to need to be able to spin the camera over here, which we can't do. This is a static camera at this time, so we're going to have to do some of that. In fact, maybe we'll do both next episode. It'll depend on how it goes. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Thank you to all our September patrons, i.e. people who've pledged in September and are supporting the videos from October to early November, and especially these Mike Check supporters. We've got Yuko Finn, Ole Peter Talgo, Adam Conway, Drazian, Jan Torrevel, Adjective, Michael McClintock, Aaron Dobson, Craig Mortel, Stephen Wendell, Julien Auger Lafont, Marius Fieldvold, Speedy Savant, Stephen Stager, Valiant Cake Fiend, Wes Olenboving, Jason Yanity, Kale the Quick, Neil, Blakey, Milner, and everyone who's watched, shared, favored, and subscribed to the series. Thank you very, very much.